yourself a thrill hunter. You've sought extreme experiences to add excitement to your dull, pathetic excuse for a life. But did you truly wish to push yourself to the brink of death? Or did you just want a quick fix? Today, you'll show me. In 2009, I will bring ultimate terror to Thorpe Park. You have only one chance of survival. Live your life on the edge or rot in this cell. Make your choice.
Would you believe me if I told you that a 15-year-old roller coaster in Surrey, England, based around a horror movie franchise is one of the best in the world? Probably not, but it's one of my favourites I've ever been on and controversially is the best at Thorpe Park. Allow me to introduce you to Saw the Ride. Saw the Ride is described by Thorpe Park as the world's first horror movie themed roller coaster and invites riders to ride through Jigsaw's most intricate traps. With swinging pendulum blades, a floor of spikes and giant rotating saw blades, this ride has a top speed of 55 miles per hour and a height of 30 metres, giving it some pretty formidable stats. But these rightfully might sound unimpressive compared to Thorpe Park's newest coaster, Hyperia, which opened earlier this year. After all, Hyperia is 150 foot taller and 36 miles per hour faster, coming in as the tallest and fastest coaster in the UK. So how, when up against record-setting coasters, can this ageing coaster themed around a largely bygone franchise possibly be described as the park's best? Let's go back to the beginning and explore its 20-year journey full of highs and lows to find out. Hi, I'm Jo, and in this video we're going to discuss how coming up to 2 decades after opening, Saw the Ride stands up as Thorpe Park's best in show. Between its amazing narrative sectioning and theming, we have a lot to talk about, but before we begin, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss out on any upcoming videos. Now that's done and dusted, let the games begin. Following the 1998 Two Swords Group acquisition of the park, there was a big push to turn the declining and unviable attraction into a leading visitor attraction. In the years that followed the acquisition, a number of ride and wider infrastructure developments occurred, including smaller scale attractions, hospitality marquees, food and beverage kiosks, and most notably, an iron coaster which would come to be known as Stealth. With the exception of 2004, visitor numbers had been steadily increasing since the acquisition and exceeded 1.4 million in 2005, which could largely be attributed to its ongoing developments. Following the successful opening of Stealth in 2006, Thorpe Park was more eager than ever to add another thrill coaster to its lineup, one which was planned to arrive just in time for the 2009 season. As the park was in the process of shifting away from its family-friendly image and more towards that of the thrill capital of the country, it only felt right for the next edition to take this to extremes. This new edition was dubbed Project Dylan, a codename after one of the project team members' cats. While the proposed ride started to gain traction online around summer of 2008, online Discourse indicates that the planning application was first submitted in 2003, which puts it in the post-Nemesis Inferno but pre-Stealth window. I did find an application for the extraction of infill material and the infilling of coaster area from 2003, but the most relevant applications I found were those from 2007, which outlined some of the dimensions and aesthetic designs of Project Dylan. At the time of the 2007 planning applications, there was no IP tied to the ride, rather just a theme with the attraction described as Canada Creek Coaster. The ride design featured many of the same features which would be used in the final product, including wooden materials, wind turbine elements, and distressed timber signage. Even though they're publicly available, I'm not sure whether I'm able to include any official documents due to copyright, so I hope you enjoy my artistic recreations instead. Planning permission for this newest coaster was approved in January 2008, with the suggestion that this new ride would give thrill hunters an experience of a lifetime, creating a darker atmosphere than had ever been seen before at Thorpe Park. And then, in mid-October 2008, less than 6 months before opening, this was solidified when Saw the Ride was officially announced in collaboration with Lionsgate and Twisted Pictures. Teasers quickly began to appear both on television and on the internet, with the launch of the now defunct yet aptly named sawtheride.com site promoting to an online audience. There's not too much information I could find up about the lead up to opening, but the website did provide a bit of information to explain why the ride materialised as it did. While I couldn't find information on when talks for rights acquisition began, by the time Saw the Ride had been formally announced, the Saw franchise had already seen box office figures exceeding $500 million. So it was a totally viable and in-demand franchise to collaborate with, setting the ride up for success before it had even opened. Both the profitability and the influence of the franchise on pop culture as a whole were explored in press releases, highlighting how by March 2009, when the ride was scheduled to be open, 5 very profitable Saw movies had already been released, with Saw 6 due to be released later that year. These press releases also outlined what guests could expect from the new ride and set a very distinct tone. They really lent into the psychological, dark and edgy angle, with the ride being described as a high-tech 21st century ghost train in pre-opening press. And sources state that Thorpe Park suggested the ride was not suitable for riders under 12. In practice, the edginess was achieved by sectioning of both the ride and the queue into 2 parts, the indoor dark ride section and the outdoor thrills. Guests began by queuing at the outdoor barbed wire lined path, with sections of the imposing coaster visible from the outside, and entered an old sawmill. It's really easy to see how the Canada Creek coaster proposition laid the foundations for the new ride. The pre-opening online discourse was not wholly positive, despite actual reception being pretty good, and I can think of a few reasons why this was the case. Firstly, Thorpe Park had mostly shied away from brand partnerships and stuck to original IP prior to this, with the exception of a few outliers like the Ribena Rapids and the Tetley Teacups, so people seemed to be upset that the park was deviating from this. Secondly, a lot of people on the dreaded coaster forums took issue with the ride IP, calling the theming lazy, cheap, and even branding Saw an outdated franchise at the time, despite it passing that $500 million mark that year. And I reckon a lot of these concerns raised were the result of a lack of overlapping interests. It appeared that a lot of those spurring negative discourse had an existing dislike for the franchise, so were harsh in their reviews of the ride. I think if the ride were to open today at a park like Universal Studios that draws a large portion of their market from the Halloween Horror Nights audience, the reception would be a lot more positive, but here, prior to even Fright Nights becoming really popular, I think much of the negativity arose not from the fact that the theming was lazy, cheap or outdated, but rather that the roller coaster / horror movie enthusiast Venn diagram doesn't typically have too big an overlap, especially in the UK. But in March 2009, as intended, the ride opened with a huge star-studded exclusive opening event, featuring familiar faces from the franchise like Darren Lynn Bousman, the director of multiple entries, and British celebrities like Jonathan Ross, who was mentioned in every report of the night I could find. Annual pass holders were able to purchase early ride access for £5 on the preview day, but the after-hours event was reserved for celebrities and saw guests being served Saw-themed snacks including canapes, bowl food and drinks. For entertainment, there was chainsaw juggling, fire eating and angle grinding. And this is the first point that I want to mention, how hard they went in for the theming. Like, they didn't have to, but they did, and we'll come back to that soon. Prior to boarding the ride, riders were put right in the heart of the Sawniverse, dropped in the grounds of Jigsaw's warehouse, which was filled with traps that, in the later stages, had live actors trapped inside them, but again, more on that later. And then, once on the ride, vehicles would leave the loading station, pass a figure of Billy the Puppet on a tricycle, and complete an indoor loop before progressing to the outdoor act, where they will be shown a video of Billy announcing that the game was over. Riders would then take on a 100-degree lift hill, some inversions, and pull back into the station. The narrative may be slightly camp and overly theatrical, but the ride does offer both physical and psychological thrills. Reviews quickly began to come out, and riders were generally pretty happy with the ride, with many going on back-to-back rides, and plenty giving positive reviews, specifically of the dark ride section. It wasn't all smooth sailing from here though, as the problems were just about to begin. Saw's opening period was a bit challenging, as is the case for most, with reported issues arising from the first day of operation. During its star-studded opening event, the ride experienced a number of teething problems, from power and lighting failures to panic-inducing e-stops. Whether exaggerated by the media or not, the ride would quickly settle down and become pretty reliable in time, just not for the first few days as forums reported multiple breakdowns and closures. These problems continued to re-emerge over the following years, with static saw blades, patchy audios, and non-functioning video screens becoming frequent issues as the ride got older. I remember this being the case when I was visiting quite frequently back in 2015, though this does line up with the Smiler accident, indicating this could have been a consequence of lower aesthetic upkeep investment due to funds being allocated elsewhere as they were focusing on addressing heightened health and safety concerns. The biggest criticism this ride has faced from opening through to the present is how rough it is. The ride safety briefing warns riders, keep your head back, brace yourselves and hold on tight. It's time to face your fears and let the games begin. But it doesn't prepare you for just how bad it is. Even now the coaster is a bit rough, especially for riders who are slightly taller, as not only is it a bit rickety, but it's also very intense. And while I understand this one is very subjective, as people have preferences and I'm a little bit gentle when it comes to coasters, there's a really big intensity shift between the beginning indoor section of the coaster and the post-lift hill section, which features multiple loops and intense twists, so that can be a bit of a jarring experience and take away from the natural ride flow. Beyond maintenance and concerns about the comfort of a ride experience, Saw has lived a relatively uneventful life, which is never a bad thing for a coaster. The only other noteworthy event was the opening night of Fright Nights in 2009, when the ride was reportedly visited by an exorcist after employees used an Ouija board to conduct a seance. Considering all of this, I can hear you say, Joe, how can the best coaster in the park be prone to so many technical problems and the occasional seance? Well, dear watcher, let me tell you why, in the grand scheme, none of that matters at all. Let's discuss the key factor that sets Saw the ride apart from others. It's storytelling. Something we'll be discussing another time is the idea of story coasters, a title which has most recently been attached to Hagrid's magical motorbike adventure at Universal Orlando. Without spoiling too much of the upcoming Discourse, this relatively new term is used to describe an attraction which combines physical and mental stimulus to create an immersive and theatrical hybrid experience that tells a story. I'm currently working on making that definition slightly more concise, but it's a really interesting subgenre as it's neither exclusively a dark ride or a coaster, which makes it unique and more immersive than most attractions. The best of both worlds. So far in my research, there are very few attractions which fit this definition, especially in the UK, but I would categorise Saw as a story coaster almost without hesitation. From the beginning, even before it was attached to the Saw IP, the ride was intended to be dark and psychologically stimulating, but I think that vision was really only fully executed and the title earned once the Lift Hill Billy the Puppet video was added into the mix. Without this, you're on a themed coaster. With the interval video, you're on a story coaster. There's a fine line, but Saw the ride hits it. From the moment you enter the queue, the immersion begins, and despite the extended switchback queue being quite nasty, it's really well themed even with its minimal features. The queue audio is in line with the style of dialogue used in the movies, and the inside queue features traps and a countdown clock in the loading area, which adds an element of thrill, intensity and adventure. As I mentioned previously, there were actually live actors contributing to the ride atmosphere in the early stages of opening. Stilt walkers and hooded figures interacted with guests in and around the ride queue, but the most thrilling and interesting feature was inside the ride building. As you enter into the warehouse itself, you'll see a caged off area on the right hand side. While as of 2024 it sits empty and has for a while, it once housed Jigsaw's victims, strapped up in the rack, an iconic trap from Saw 3 that would be less than pleasant to be trapped in. The actor in the trap would scream, shout and beg those in the queue line for help, and occasionally be visited by a hooded figure in a pig mask. There are reports that guests would try to grab the ankles of the staff, however, so you can see why this element didn't last so long. These actors continued to make various appearances in later years as well, most notably at Thorpe Park Fright Night events, thrilling guests particularly in the outside queue line. Unfortunately, their appearance wasn't guaranteed or even predictable, but their presence brought a sense of tension and immersion that really contributed to the storytelling. I will say it is a shame that you can't experience the live actors on the ride anymore, but I view them as a cherry on top rather than an integral part of this specific experience. Before you even get on the ride, you'll notice the ride vehicles described on proposals as looking handmade and being constructed from recycled old machinery parts, which could, narratively, be found lying around an old sawmill. This is so totally in line with the Saw franchise and the ride vision, it just can't be faulted. And then once you've boarded the vehicles, this immersion continues with the indoor section, which is not only physically great with smooth stomach-wrenching drops and well-paced varied features, but again is a great example of storytelling, this time through the ride design and engineering. Depending on which cart you're in, you might also get to see Billy the Puppet deliver expositional dialogue, and you'll see some of the traps from the films and the body in the bathroom, even if just for a fleeting moment. Then, as you pull around the corner to see the game over video as you approach the vertical drop, it's great, it's just really great. I've ridden this ride in nearly every operation mode possible, and I can't stress enough the impact that having that particular video playing on the screens and the rotating saws operating has on the experience. These tiny features elevate it from a big coaster with a drop to a high-stakes, narrative-driven coaster with a life or death drop. Suddenly, the coaster becomes a trap in itself, meant to test your will to live and push you to the limits, rather than just a set of intense loops. There's also a really nice tie-in at the end of the ride as you're pulling back into the loading station, with audio of Jigsaw announcing you've survived the ride, and a Billy Puppet looking right at you from the shelving units, leading to a very cyclical feel. It's not just, oh wow, that was a cool coaster, but instead, as you're walking down the stairs and seeing the Jigsaw-related graffiti, it becomes a, wow, I still feel a little bit nervous after that ride, and it's not because of the intensity of the track kind of moment. I hate to sound cliche, but it really does take it from just being a coaster all the way to an experience. I'm a horror experience fan anyway, so I'll always be pushing for the retention of darker, more story-driven attractions like this, but Saw helps to highlight the influence and importance of having attractions like these, and showcase how exciting and impactful an experience coaster can be compared to just a standard roller coaster. I feel it's a fair conclusion to draw that Saw is the best themed, most well-rounded attraction at Thorpe Park, a viewpoint which has only been solidified by the Swarm being a bit ropey in terms of narrative when I last visited. The Saw show building uses a small space to create something disorienting, suspenseful and intensely story-focused, and I think that's really admirable and something that's very easy to lose and has been lost in some newer coasters we've seen. As outlined above, if ride maintenance were to decline again and some of the elements be cut off, I do think the ride would be at risk at losing its title, but for now, it's right up there. But I'm not sure how much longer it has left. As Saw the ride approaches the end of its coaster life cycle, I implore you to give it a shot so as not to miss out. If it does end up on the chopping block as rumours suggest, I sincerely hope that Thorpe Park would follow the Alton Towers Nemesis route and choose to keep the coaster just in a retracked format. Whether the attraction loses its IP ties and just becomes a generic come along to the warehouse and meet the horrors of insert villain name here, returns to its Canada Creek sawmill roots, or with the resurgence of the Saw franchise maintains its branding, I'd love to see Saw vibes stay for a little bit longer. However, despite this and being hands down the best attraction in the park, I fear that this won't be the case. The once immersive and Fright Night's hallmark Saw Alive maze, more on her another day, died an uncivilized death, and I anticipate that to be the case here too, with the removal of the attraction and redevelopment of the area, including what's left of Logger's Leap and Samurai, being flattened for a new coaster. If this were the case, I'd love it if the new attraction at Thorpe Park were to bring in was a little bit darker and, dare I say, edgier, having shown that they can do it and they can do it well. While doing this, I hope there would also be an effort spent on honing the narrative and storytelling of the other coasters in the park. While there would be limitations based on existing structures and the inability to offer dark sections as Saw the ride does, it would be excellent to see more story coasters popping up, offering more of an immersive lineup in the park. I think this would be crucial for creating a new direction for Thorpe Park as well, especially considering how some of the most recent developments have focused more on thrills. And this is something I can get away with just because the market in the UK isn't as competitive as it is elsewhere. But I really love the idea of just doing better because you can, and I think Saw the Ride is a great example of them doing this previously, and I hope they can do it again. The future of Saw's role in Thorpe Park may be unclear, but one thing is for sure, the games aren't over just yet. But unfortunately my ride analysis is, so thank you for watching and make sure you like it if you enjoyed it. For more theme park history and hot takes, ride redesigns and coaster content, be sure to subscribe to my channel and I'll see you real soon.